This is the second video of the Cobb access port comparison. And in the first video, I went over what the plan was. And in this video, I'm going to go over how things went. So there's links below to the pages where this information is contained, which is going to be a lot more detailed than what these videos have, but I'll try and give a general overview and some key thoughts about the outcome of this comparison. So quickly recapping, these are Cobb-based aftermarket engine tunes for the Mk7 GTI. The ones that I've selected are the Stage 2 Cobb tune that comes with the access port, Equilibrium Tuning Stage 2, Sneaky Tuned Stage 2, and Stratified's equivalent to Stage 2. Basically, with them, you send them a list of your parts and they provide a tune that's supposed to be matched up to that. It's not a custom tune, it's just they don't have stages. So those are the software versions that I've put on my Mk7 GTI, and data that I've collected has been on the street. That's full throttle acceleration in third gear, starting around 2,000, 2,500-ish RPM to around 6,000, 6,500. Recording engine variables, stuff like air-to-fuel ratio, timing, boost, and then the vehicle's acceleration time, and then using that information as well as vehicle speed to calculate the peak wheel horsepower using the virtual dyno application. So a couple things as far as like just the procedures go. I mentioned, and I have a link to it, as far as using virtual dyno, explain kind of some of my use with that. And this go around, with the number of tunes that I've used, I also did a comparison with the DynoJet when I recorded data there and found a really high correlation between the two. And then as far as the street data goes and the amount of data that I've been recording there, did a short analysis on that to make sure that the data, I was getting sufficient data to be able to make a fairly conclusive comparison between these products. So it wasn't just like one pull on the street and comparing it with another one. And I ran enough to determine that for the threshold of difference that I was interested in, which was a peak wheel horsepower of 7 wheel horsepower, that at least 6 samples of each tune would be necessary. I went well above that. I think the minimum I had was around a dozen, and for a couple of these tunes, I've got about 20 plus pulls that I've done. Didn't use every single one of them, but that got enough to get some good data. And then the one other thing that I address in a separate section is some software that I'm using that allows me to log variables from the engine that aren't accessible with the Cobb access port. And that is the noise signal, the average noise level, which is basically just a moving average of the noise signal, and then noise threshold, which is based on that moving average. It's multiplied by a gain factor and has an offset applied to it, and that determines this threshold. And if the noise signal goes above that threshold, that's where the ECU determines that a knock, potential knock event has occurred and starts to take some preventative measures to keep the engine safe. So that's something that I've described on a separate page and would be worth your while to look at if you're going to look at some of this data and look at that, because that's pretty insightful as far as, you know, the approach that some of the tuners use to delivering the power that you see and the perception of what is safe and what's not safe. So that's the background. And as far as capturing the data, like I said, successfully did that. Took several weeks to get through all the different tunes, getting enough data, having the right temperature conditions to keep things fair and even as far as the different tunes go, making sure the temperatures were the same. And then on the dyno, that was all done in one day, a couple of hours. Temperatures stayed consistent on that day. So that was a very successful dyno session. All this information is contained on pages that are linked below. I've got one page that's set up, which is the individual tunes, the polls that I've done, a sampling of how the variables like AFR, boost, etc. looked on multiple polls for that particular tune. I didn't put every single one of them because when you get like 20 different polls, it just starts to become a mess of lines. So just enough to give a sense of that. I did that for each one of those, along with the DynoJet, or rather virtual Dyno estimated numbers. There's another page that's got street data. That page contains all those individual tunes, their results aggregated into an average, and then comparing them. So you've got tune X compared with tune Y with tune Z. They're all on the same chart, and it is the average value. The intent there is to show trends between these tunes, just in general what you can expect from them. And there's also the estimates for the peak wheel horsepower, the acceleration times, etc., that type of stuff. There's also longitudinal acceleration, which is how rapidly the vehicle's accelerating. And I've logged that versus the pedal position to give a sense of throttle response, how far you push the pedal, how much the car is accelerating, to show that for some of the different tunes, how that may compare. I only did that in first and second gear. I think at the higher gears, it's not as noticeable, so I just limited it to those two. And then as far as the dyno goes, that's pretty straightforward. You get wheel horsepower and wheel torque, not much else to get from that. With respect to the actual results, I think looking at the data is probably the best course, but I will go over it just to describe it. But I think the intent of capturing this data was to allow people to make up their own mind about what seemed most suitable to them and what they liked. But I'll go ahead and give my thoughts on some of the things that I saw that maybe I wasn't expecting, things that confirmed things that I had suspicions about, etc., that type of stuff. So starting off with the stock tune, no real surprises there. Moderate power. I was a little bit surprised at how quickly the boost pressure drops off after around 4,000, 4,500 RPM. It really just plummets, which was slightly surprising to me. But aside from that, most of the rest of the stuff I saw from it was not all unexpected at all. The Cobb Stage 2 tune was one that I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to log and compare those results with both stock as well as some of the popular aftermarket tunes, because the Cobb software has a pretty bad rap as far as I can tell. And when you look at it from the perspective of what it is doing and what it delivers, I don't think it's deserved. In terms of power output, it is less than these aftermarket tunes, which is hardly surprising when you look at take a look at the boost curve. You see it dropping rapidly. Look at the timing. I think it has the least aggressive timing of any of the tunes out there. And so when you see those types of things, then you hear it talked about as being trash and, dangerous, going to ruin your engine if you use the Cobb tune. And you look at that and you say, okay, how's that happening when it's running relatively low boost and low timing? That just doesn't add up. And then you throw in the new variable, which is the noise signal, noise level, thresholds, and all that. And you see that Cobb is running OEM safety measures. That's if you're talking safe, that's pretty much as safe as it's going to get. It's using what Volkswagen's built for this car. And so this gets to that issue that I bring up with the Cobb access port reporting knock retard, which is very misleading, or potentially misleading, as I put, because the knock value that the sensor is reading is processed prior to determining what the ignition retard is going to be. And that processing is subject to manipulation by software tuners. So what you get for a knock retard value depends a lot on what the software tuner has done with values in the different tables that they can modify. And I've checked with Cobb, and they've stated they don't make any changes to the OEM software safety measures related to knock, which is evident because you can see that it doesn't, when on some of the charts where I show the difference between stock and what Cobb is, the differences are pretty negligible, really just due to random variation of the fact that I'm logging information on the street and there's going to be some variation. So debunking the idea that the Cobb tune is going to be damaging in any way was a good outcome from this. And then I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 wheel horsepower of increased power compared to stock, which is not an insignificant amount. There's a lot of parts that you buy, intakes, inlet pipes, charge pipes, intercoolers, that would love to make a 40 wheel horsepower difference, and the Cobb access port provides that software along with it for no extra charge. So that's not really a bad return on the cost there. So that was one of the big interesting bits that come out of this. Another tune that I looked at, I'll just kind of run through the tunes in the order that I have them listed, was equilibrium tunings. I would say, as far as the data that I recorded, it was interesting. There wasn't anything that surprised me. I've heard that it runs a lot of boost, and sure enough, it runs a lot of boost. And, there's a good amount of timing there as well. What I did find kind of interesting is that it has a reputation of running a lot of boost, a lot of timing, and it's very safe. Because it doesn't have much knock retard. And this is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum from the Cobb, where the reason it's not showing much knock retard is evident in the noise signal and noise threshold analysis, where you see that company is bumping up the noise threshold. That was an interesting, it makes sense. People who've made the point that it runs a lot of boost, quite a bit of timing, and is very safe. I don't see how you got to that conclusion, because those things really are incompatible. You don't run a lot of boost, a lot of timing, and make things more safe. That's just the nature of the game. So that was another interesting conclusion from the data that was collected. The sneaky tune, I hadn't had much experience with, like exposure to it, I guess you could say, and I wasn't all that familiar with how it was going to work. So that was an interesting one to have some driving time with. A lot of torque on that one, and you definitely notice it. It's more noticeable than both the stratified and EQT tunes, the amount of torque the car produces when it's got that, and that's reflected in the dyno as well, in the longitudinal acceleration data. You see that, with boost pressure. That's pretty much what's happening there, as well as quite a bit of timing. At that engine speed, it's running the most boost and the most timing. So hey, surprise, it's got the most torque. Likewise, with the EQT tune, the sneaky tune is showing that they're numbing the knock sensors in that range. And also, I found it interesting how much they dropped off the boost pressure with engine speed. Not that there's anything wrong with it. The car seems to drive fine. It was just interesting to see that they would taper the boost off as much as they had relative to the other two tunes, aftermarket ones that I had looked at. Stratified was probably the least interesting to get data from, and by that I mean there was just like nothing really struck me as unusual. It runs more boost pressure than stock, not as much as some of the other tunes, and timing actually was not as advanced as I kind of thought it might be. Pretty moderate, but they managed to get a pretty good amount of power. The second highest power, and not that far off from the lead of how much power is being produced. And the torque is down, which makes sense because of the amount of timing that it's running early on. But, on the other hand, they're running pretty much the OEM knock safety measures. So those are the results as far as my overall impression and really what would I use for an off-the-shelf tune. And that's probably the key point, is off-the-shelf. These tuners all offer custom tunes, and I limited this to off-the-shelf tunes. There are other tuners out there that do custom work, but I didn't see them offering off-the-shelf tunes, which is why they're not being compared. But if you want to go custom, then kind of that opens up the possibilities of some other companies. But to that point, if you're doing a custom tune, you as the customer are making decisions about what you want, what type of risks you're willing to take with your specific car for your goals. Whereas the off-the-shelf tune it needs to be written to the average consumer who could have a wide range of goals. And my assumption there is, if you're an average consumer and you want maximum power, well, you ought to be looking into a custom tune. So that off-the-shelf tune is really focused on the person that wants a little bit of a bump in power and wants to maintain some reliability on their car, which means you don't start messing with the NOx sensors. And just on that alone, that pretty much eliminates the sneaky tune as well as the EQT tune for consideration, because they clearly both modify the NOx sensor settings in some capacity because of the data shows it. Which leaves Stratified as the one to use as an off-the-shelf tune, because they're keeping the safety measures in there as well. They're making good power. So that'd be my choice between the ones that I've looked at here. And of course, the Cobb tune did not look bad. You're giving up a little bit more power, but the whole business about it not being safe, somebody's going to have to make a really good argument for why running low boost, low timing, and full NOx safeties from the OEM is unsafe. That just does not add up. So hopefully this information was useful. Look through the web pages, lots of stuff there. Debate it amongst yourselves. Make your own decisions on what you think is the best one suited for your needs. So, till next time.